Hey everybody, it's good to see you. Welcome to the Rise of HXM, Human Experience Management. I'm your host, Lori Rudiman. And as always, we're here today to talk about HXM. And before we get started, I just wanted to re-explain for those of you who are new to our wonderful streaming show that HXM is all about processes, tools, technologies, platforms, but really a philosophy to put people at the center of work. And why do we do that? Because employee experience matters. When you put people at the center of everything at work, well, frankly, you win. You win philosophically, you win on the marketplace, you're just winning all over. And I'm so excited today to talk a little bit about HXM and human experience management, as always with my co-host, Lars Schmidt. Lars, how you doing?
Lori, I'm doing great. It's good to be here. It's good to be back. And, I'm really excited actually about today's show, both our guest and our topic. We're going to be talking about human experience management in the context of retail. And going through what we've all experienced over the last, 15 months has transformed business broadly, but it's had a profound impact on the retail space. And putting human experience first as it relates to retail environments where you're dealing with the complexity of workforce and retention and upskilling and engagement, productivity, so many different variables that are key to success. There's going to be a lot to dig into. And so I'm excited to introduce our guest, Denise Leon. She is a brand leadership expert. She's a best-selling author. She's a keynote speaker, and she is deeply, entrenched in the space and is really going to help us understand the complexities of retail and human experience management a bit better. So Denise, thanks so much for coming on the show. If you wouldn't mind, why don't you give the viewers just a quick introduction on you and then we'll dig in.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be a part of this conversation. And yeah, I've worked in retail and restaurants for most of my career, and I really see that as kind of like the front line in what has been a very disruptive, 16, 18 months. So an employee experience is such a critical part of what's going on in that category. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. And Denise, I want to jump right in with, connecting HR and retail. Like when you think about the complexities in the retail space today, how do you think of those from an HR perspective? What are some of the biggest imperatives for HR and retail today?
Yeah, well, first, let me acknowledge that, when we talk about retail, although we're talking about a sector, there are lots of different segments within the sector, and there are going to be challenges that vary between the different segments. So, there are different categories, whether you're in groceries versus hard goods versus services. You've got different business models, whether you are a vertically integrated brand versus a multi-brand retailer, a manufacturer who's going direct to consumer, and then you've got geographic differences. So I understand that, there are lots of different challenges across the retail industry. But if I had to summarize, I would say there are two big issues today. One is the war for talent. right? Recruiting is very difficult these days. The workforce, it's kind of counterintuitive, but we're having a hard time attracting and then retaining skilled workers who want to do retail jobs. And that's really also exacerbated because of the pandemic and the inability to predict demand levels and to understand customers' needs, not to mention, being prepared for what may become further shutdowns or restrictions. So this kind of war for talent and recruiting, I think, is a big issue across retail. The second is that customer experience has really changed dramatically over the last 16, 18 months. We have new delivery modes, new channels, new services. And so what that means is we're asking our employees to stand up new capabilities for our organizations. And that puts a lot of pressure and stress on our employees. That's the second big issue. And then, of course, there are all the timeless issues of retail human resources, trying to motivate and engage what is usually a fairly low wage, mostly part-time workforce, lots of issues with labor costs and getting optimized scheduling. So retailers, we understand your pain.
Well, I'm so grateful to have your expertise here today, Denise, because you make a really great and compelling case that the world of retail is broad, it's vast, it's changing. There's a war for talent, and then a link between CX and EX that's more important now than ever before. I wonder if you can talk about the imperative of changing from this HCM mindset, this old way of doing HR, to HXM, which really puts employees at the center of everything. Can you talk to us about that pivot, about that change in the marketplace?
Sure. Well, let's talk about what that change is first. It is going from kind of maybe more of a process or program approach to a human-centered approach. Just like with customer experience, employee experience in HXM is all about putting the employee at the center of everything you do and really trying to understand very deeply what employees are looking for and how do we support and equip and empower them to do great work. So we're going from process to human-centeredness. We're also going from maybe more of a kind of functional approach to employees to a holistic experience. We can't separate out employees' needs in one area of their lives versus another. And so when we think about employee experience, we need to think about the totality of everything that they need in terms of support. So it's from kind of less of a kind of HR function standpoint to more of a holistic experience that goes actually well beyond HR. It includes things like IT, facilities, corporate communications, and beyond. So, employees, when we make that shift, we have to recognize that, the humanity of our employees and the fact that their expectations are being elevated. We're all customers as well as employees, and we're being trained by the best companies in the world to expect to get what we want, where, when, and how we want it. And employees bring that expectation to the workplace. There's almost kind of, I would say, a new social contract between employers and employees these days, where employees are looking for their needs to be met, their values to be engaged, their purpose to be connected to the organization's purpose. And so the shift to HXM is really about acknowledging that shift that employees have made and trying to incorporate tools and processes and resources to equip them. For example, Best Buy, the electronics retailer, they have done a lot of work over the last, maybe 5, even 10 years to really upgrade their approach to employees. And one example is that they had introduced a new POS system, a point of sale system into their stores, which was supposed to make the transaction with customers much easier. But in their research and their digging to find out what employees were experiencing, they discovered that employees were having a difficult time adopting this new system. So it used experience design approaches, design thinking to really improve the system, as well as to bring in new technology that enhanced the POS training and just kind of smooth the transactions. And in doing so, not only did they improve the customer experience, but they reduced the frustration and kind of the friction for employees. So this is just one example of a retailer who's kind of taking a look at everything that an employee needs to be successful and to contribute to a company's success.
Thank you for that. Lars, I just had a thought as I was listening to Denise. This idea of HXM is so relatable, no matter what guest we have on, right? Whether it's Marcia Robinson or Joey Price or last week, Nestor. This concept of HXM is across all industries, across all segments, and really a global movement. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have yet to have a guest who hasn't made that same connection around kind of the importance and the shift and the prioritization of it. And I think, Denise really hit on a point around the social contract and kind of construct and expectations that job seekers have, that your employees have around what they will get from the experience of working for your organization beyond a paycheck. And, Denise, I want to kind of bring that back to you as well in the context of recruiting. So the point around having kind of a social contract and the expectation that employees have today, beyond, again, just a paycheck. How do you see companies in retail responding to that? How is this shift towards HXM, kind of forcing them to maybe recalibrate their approaches and their thinking around recruiting talent in this environment where, you've both mentioned kind of the war for talent, highly competitive, how the companies that are being effective in this market, what are they doing that's separating them from the rest?
Yeah, that is such an important topic. And so I'll talk about two things. The first is that I think, generally speaking, most employees, most people want to do meaningful work. They want to be contributing to something that's important and that gives their specific day-to-day work, kind of a bigger purpose, a broader impact. And so what employers need to do is make sure that they have a clear purpose and values that guide and drive the organization, but then B, that they're connecting the employees to that bigger purpose. So, example of Starbucks. Okay, so they say that their mission is to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, one neighborhood at a time. And I think they've realized that mission, that purpose, definitely includes their employees, or they call them partners. And so they think about, how do we inspire and nurture our partners? And that's, I think, what has brought them to offer great benefits such as stock grants, college tuition. Even during the pandemic, they expanded their mental health benefits they offered to employees. They offered grants that employees could apply for to help to get extra help that they needed during the pandemic. And so this is, one way that a company kind of says, hey, if our purpose is to inspire our customers and our communities, we need to inspire our employees so that they can then in turn do that for our external stakeholders. So that's one thing I'd say is, make a clear connection between, what you're doing as a company and what the experience is for the employees. And that really leads to the second point I'll talk about, which is authenticity. Employees these days are not going to believe it. I said you need a purpose and values, but they're not going to believe your purpose and values if they're like a plaque in the break room, or if it's their words on your web page. They want to know that you actually live and breathe these purpose and the purpose and values. And so another example comes from REI. REI is all about celebrating the outdoors and the adventure and excitement of the outdoors. And so several years ago, when they were thinking about their holiday season, they decided that they wanted to close their stores on Black Friday to encourage their employees to enjoy the outdoors. It was something that they felt was really kind of a part of their core values and the way that they approached their employees. And so in doing so, they then created this opt outside campaign that involved their customers. So obviously they would still take online orders, but all of the stores, all of REI's stores were closed on Black Friday. And that's a real example of like the authenticity of their mission to say, we're not going to just do things for customers and not treat our employees the same way. We're actually going to give our employees the opportunity to be outside. And oh, by the way, our customers enjoy that also. So I think that, when you are thinking about recruiting employees, these are the things that matter to them. Do your purpose and values align with their purpose and values? And then are you operating like with authenticity, like an authentic company?
Denise, I love this conversation and where it's headed, because we're talking about recruiting and really aligning the employee experience with values. And what we're really starting to get to the core of is this concept of culture, environment, how we treat people. And I know you have really wonderful insights on how HXM can really drive home this idea of culture, but I also know that you have some insights on what makes a productive and a happy worker. So maybe you can tackle either one, dealer's choice, but I would love to know your thoughts on culture and HXM and also on this idea of productivity and happiness.
Yeah, well, I think employee productivity comes down to employees understanding what customers need and then being able to fulfill those needs and to do it in an efficient way. I think that so much of the gap in productivity happens because employees are misaligned or they're misdirected and they're working, they're doing stuff, but they're not creating impact for the customer. And so in general, I would say that there's a pretty big gap between employees and customers and, kind of employees understanding customers. According to the consulting firm PwC, only 38% of customers say the employees they interact with demonstrate that they understand their needs. So only 38% of employees are demonstrating a need. And actually that 38% is kind of a high number when you consider what Merit's found. They found that only 14% of employees say that their work groups have a clear understanding of what customers need. So what we need to do is really cultivate customer understanding and empathy and insights in order to make sure that employees know what the point of their work is and how to best channel everything that they're doing to meet customers' needs. Ways to achieve this kind of employee customer tight connection. One is to make sure that you are exposing your employees, and I mean all employees, not just your frontline, but all employees, to customer feedback and allowing them to really understand what customers are trying to do. Adobe Systems allows or expects their employees to listen in on customer support calls or to monitor customers in their store so they can kind of get a sense for what are customers trying to do. Another company, SunPower, which installs oh gosh, I'm totally blanking. Solar powered energy for homes. They create a dashboard for employees on how they're doing on customer experience so that employees can pinpoint where are the pain points that customers are having, where are the breakdowns in communication, where am I setting up my colleagues, other employees for failure because I'm not passing along a customer in a way that is seamless and is efficient. And so we need to be empowering our employees with tools for them to understand customers, understand how they're performing on customer experience so that they can, like I said, most employees want to do a good job, but we just need to make sure we give them the tools and resources to do that.
Denise, you don't mess around with those examples. You show up and show up prepared, and we're so grateful for that. Thank you.
I know. I love it. It's making all of these, these things very tangible and real. And I imagine, especially with brands that a lot of the viewers are familiar with. Denise, I want to go a little deeper on one of the topics you just mentioned, which is around productivity, because I think measuring productivity is kind of like this next frontier for HR, particularly, and I'm going broader than retail for a moment. Many of us who have employees in organizations that are working remotely and or maybe we're going to be hybrid or fully distributed, the big question keeps coming back to, like, for old school managers who are used to, evaluating productivity by butts and seats, which was a horrible way to do it, still is. We need to get them comfortable with how do you gauge productivity of employees that you don't see. And retail very much falls in that category as well, where, like, your employees on the front lines in retail environments aren't always, directly under a manager's, scope. And so maybe there's some lessons from retail we can take to other sectors as well. Like, when you think about measuring productivity in retail, like, what are some ways to get that right? What are some ways that you've seen organizations be effective with that?
Yeah, well, I think first, before I answer that specific question, Lars, let me just acknowledge something that you said I think is really important, which is that, many of our employees, even frontline retail employees, are not always operating under managerial supervision. And so there needs to be an implicit sense of trust between a manager and employee, between a company and their workforce. And I think it's upon the company and the employer to demonstrate that trust first. The research shows that employees are much more productive when a manager is not hovering, when a manager is not micromanaging, but when a manager clearly sets out, these are the desired outcomes. These are the things we want you to do for customers. Now, you figure out the best way to do it. So I think just in general, I wanted just to make the point that, when we talk about productivity, yes, we can measure it, but it has to be with a foundation of trust in our employees. Now, in terms of productivity, this is a hard question. I think I've seen metrics where you're looking at, certain outputs per employee or per employee work hour. And I think those metrics might be helpful. But one of the things that gets really tricky is in a multi-channel or omni-channel environment, often, a sale or an outcome is the result of several different employees or several different departments or several different functions all working together to get a customer to that point. Just because a customer comes into your store and buys, this thing, doesn't mean that they haven't done a lot of research online, doesn't mean that they've actually, talked to a salesperson or chatted with someone or looked at social media to get more information about their purchase. And so I would just caution retailers not to focus just on that end transaction, but really kind of develop a full model for attribution that accounts for all the different variables within an omni-channel environment. But I think, one of the measurements that I think is really important, or I should say one area of measurement that's really important, is employee engagement in terms of what I was talking about before. Do they understand customers? Do they feel well equipped to meet customers' needs? Do they understand your brand and what you stand for and what the messaging and what the values that you want to communicate to your customers are? And those things then can be correlated or matched up to the actual sales results that you're getting. So you can kind of get a sense for, are these things, are employees contributing to our sales given their state of engagement or not? So I think it's multi-leveled. It's a lot more complex, that it's way above my pay grade, but just to kind of acknowledge that those are some of the things that I would be looking to measure.
Well, Denise, you've done a really good job of both implicitly and explicitly making the connection between having a people-first strategy and business results. Like, you've made the case, but I wonder, let's take it to the end point of this discussion, which is really about winning. How does a retailer know that they're winning in this space? And what does winning look like, especially in the language of HXM?
Yeah. Well, going back to the very first thing we talked about in terms of the war for talent and the recruiting challenge that retailers have. So winning definitely looks like maintaining or managing your turnover costs down. And so using your systems and processes to not only make you more efficient, but to actually deliver experiences that attract and retain employees, I think is critical. And so, number one business result is if you can lower your turnover costs, you're doing great. But another thing that I think is equally important is your brand power and your competitive advantage. And we can't underestimate the impact that employees have on that. The folks at Interview, a consulting firm that works with frontline employees, has found that they ask the corporate teams and frontline employees about what the brand message is. And what they found is that the average company is losing about 20% of their brand message between what corporate is sending out and what their salespeople are actually representing to customers. And so if only 20% of what you want to stand for as a brand is actually getting delivered to customers, you're leaving a lot of brand power, brand differentiation on the table. So what we need to do is make sure that our employees understand what our brand stands for, knows how to represent it, knows how to serve people using our brand values and attributes. And that is what leads to a stronger brand, which then in turn leads to higher profits, higher margins, greater loyalty, and lower costs.
Well, Denise, that's a great way to end the discussion around winning. And just for everybody out there, if you have a moment in time at work or at home or in life where you see experience making the difference for you in your business, in your personal life, go ahead and take a photo, do a video, give us a little tweet, and use the hashtag Experience Wins and HXM, those two hashtags, and we'll see it and we'll give you a shout out. We want you to feel like experience will help you win too. And Denise, I just want to thank you for taking us through a really interesting conversation around retail and HXM. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Denise. I know I took a lot of mental notes, and there's a lot more companies I'm going to be doing more homework on to learn how they're making this real. So, for all you viewers, thanks for joining us. To learn more, go to sap.com/HXM, and we will be back same time next week. We're having a returning guest. Our friend Joey Price is going to be back to talk to us all about HR in the cloud. So you won't want to miss it. In the meantime, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and we will see you next week.